All right. Well, hello and welcome to the inaugural Zcast podcast. So my name is Adam Bossu. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Xenos, and today I'm going to be joined by Ed Wang, who is Senior IT Manager at NetApp. Hi, Ed.
Hi, how's it going?
Excellent, thanks. So thanks again, obviously, for taking the time to talk with us today. The goal of these podcasts is basically to provide an informal forum for IT professionals to share their opinions of the changing technology space, challenges, best practices that they have, or basically any relevant topic that they feel their peers in the industry would be interested in. So with that, why don't we dive into our first question?
Okay.
I know, obviously, NetApp is at the forefront of storage technology. You guys have converged flash infrastructures. You're working on OpenStack-based object storage platforms. What I'm kind of curious to get your opinion on is, do you think that the pace of technology adoption is actually accelerating or at least trying to keep up with the pace of innovation?
I would say for NetApp, yes, it is. And NetApp, and I think with some of the other technology companies, you're going to see this, right, where the IT shop is what we like to call, drinking our own champagne. So as the innovation is happening, we're actually adopting them, as fast as we could. So within NetApp, we have a Customer One program where, we're really the first customers to be using our FCS products, if you will, right? And sometimes we even call ourselves Customer Zero, where we're actually testing out codes that hasn't been released in our IT environment. So specifically for NetApp, I would say absolutely yes. We are definitely adopting our technology as fast as the innovation is happening. So, if you were to kind of think about, what NetApp has done with the OpenStack Manila module, this is for the file share, or the shared file system. We work very closely, the IT department, we work very closely with our product team, and we provide direct feedback as we're kind of testing out, their releases of Manila. Obviously, I don't expect most of the IT shops out in the world to be doing this, because there's always a fine balance, I think, between stability and the inherent risk of being on the bleeding edge, right? So, I would say most IT organizations probably will take the approach of innovating the lower risk area. So if there's, internal websites and stuff like that, they may want to stick, their internal website type hosts into their, newly adopted private cloud environment versus putting, say, SAP on it. So again, I think, for your average IT organization, you'll see the implementation of technology, new technology being done in the lower risk area. And as the technology matures, you'll see the companies start to slowly expand into areas where there's more mission critical applications.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense as a best practice. I'm kind of curious. I mean, obviously, a lot of that new technology, right, everything itself is sort of aimed at speeding us up. So how do we get faster service delivery? How do we get faster deployment? How do I get insights faster with faster analytics? Everything is faster, faster, faster. But I wonder, is that speed putting an exponential burden of complexity on the IT staff set up to support those new technologies? And it sort of sounds like maybe if up front they're innovating on the lower end of things and as a best practice, trying to not be on the bleeding edge of everything, I guess, as you're recommending. Is that a better approach, or do you think that the speed of technology adoption is just going to be hand in hand with more complexity?
So I think it does come with it, but I don't know if I would say that it's exponential. I would definitely say it's certainly not on the same pace as the growth in new technology. And what I mean by that is that even the new technologies that we're seeing today, right, they come from a very similar foundation, if you will, or a foundation that people may be familiar with. I kind of use an analogy of, if you look at the English language, it's Latin-based, and so are a lot of other languages that, that kind of come from the same root. So there's always that foundation that's kind of laid there already, where if you understand that foundation, then as new things develop, as long as you have a really good understanding of that foundation, it becomes easier to adopt, right? So if you were to look at, something that, you hear all the time nowadays, Dockers or containers in general, people throw around all the time, and one would think that, hey, you know what? This whole Docker thing, it should be pretty hard to catch up on, to try to support, et cetera. But the reality is that it really isn't, because containers actually been around for a while. Obviously not the same containers, but, in our IT shop over here, we've been using Solaris containers for several years. So, when we start talking about Docker container and how different it is from a ESX, a VM environment, it doesn't take long for people to fully understand what a container really is, because a lot of the folks, at least in our IT department, is already familiar to an extent of how a container works, how it shares the same kernel, et cetera. So I think you're going to see that a lot with some of the new technologies, even though they may be one of the latest and greatest technology. The fact of the matter is that a lot of it is built upon a foundation that, foundational technology that's already existed, for a while. So in that sense, there is a learning curve, but I think the learning curve is not as bad as something that's completely novel that nobody's ever heard of before.
Right.
So because of that, you don't have that kind of learning curve with as steep a learning curve from a technology standpoint. And in our case, going back to the container analogy, we have gone through the growing pain of using containers and what it meant as far as business processes, governance, best practices, all that stuff. So it's not just about the pain that or the lack of pain you would feel from learning the technology, but also the lack of pain from trying to develop the business processes perspective, right? Because we've used similar technology before, a foundational technology before. Some of the business processes we can potentially leverage because of lessons learned in the past.
All right. So Ed, obviously you mentioned the ability to build on top of existing understanding of previous technologies to sort of take the expertise that you've built up over the years and combine them with similar technologies. But one of the things that I'm curious about is obviously we move into an age of cloud computing, converged becomes hyper-converged, and really the intricacies of what services depend on start changing very dynamically. Does monitoring those technologies become a lot harder for IT operations to do at the same time that it's becoming more critical for the business to do the monitoring?
Yeah, so absolutely. So, monitoring used to be about, what are the servers in my data center doing, right? So I got, pizza boxes, 2U boxes, what have you, sitting in racks. I'm monitoring them. I'm looking at the CPU. I'm looking at the up-down. Life was, I would say, much simpler back then. Now it's about, how my application's performing, how's it doing in my data center in the traditional infrastructure, quote unquote. How's it doing in my private cloud? How is it doing in my public cloud? How do we monitor and manage things like containers? If I have a CMDB that my monitoring tool uses as a single source of truth, how does the ever-changing infrastructure impact how I can monitor these elements, right? So if a system was meant to constantly go up and down because, we got this elasticity built in, how does that impact my monitoring? How do I build in the intelligence to say, hey, you know what, this thing's supposed to be down right now, right? So all those are new challenges I think we've not seen in the past. And we look at a lot more, for lack of a better term, elements, if you will, that we have ever done in the past. So to me, the key is to how we monitor these elements, whether it be a CPU spike or a Web3 response, or a combination of a certain line popping out of an application log along with another line popping up in the database log, right? So the most important thing I think now is to be able to take all these pieces of information and how do we aggregate all this information together so that we can paint a whole picture instead of, if you kind of imagine individual pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, which is what we historically have had. Right, because life was simpler back then, so we could get away with that. But now it's really a matter of taking these individual jigsaw puzzles and painting the whole picture with it and realize what that picture looks like. And that's always going to be the challenge.
And it sounds like, obviously to your same point, building in some level of intelligence, too, to what you're monitoring now and how you're monitoring it, the rules and the automation that you build into it so that when, like you said, if the CPU is supposed to be spiking or even going down at a certain time for off, that stuff is built in and doesn't create event storms or things that necessarily don't need to happen because it's a planned event. Right.
And really the key is, to me, is about the ability to integrate. So if you were to look at, Xenos, for example, right, the ability to integrate with something like a ServiceNow or some other tool, it's not something that you see as readily available in some of the older traditional monitoring tools, where there's that ease of integration, whether it be mostly through APIs or other methods. The older I would say last generation monitoring tools, that was not a philosophy that needed to be there. But nowadays, it's definitely an approach that is almost a requirement in order for us to be able to paint that whole picture.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's pivot slightly because there's one other topic I'm really kind of curious to get your take on. So obviously earlier we mentioned NetApp's work with OpenStack. OpenStack obviously is a big cornerstone for the open source marketplace in general, and I think one of the things that's interesting is it's become pretty clear that the adoption of open source software in general is continuing to rise. And I'm curious sort of how that ties back in, because I'm wondering if you think that the trend is a direct result of the new technology adoption, i.e., are companies really adopting open source because they need software that can be adapted to their own specific and often changing, as we talked about, needs?
I would say the trend is definitely at least partly driven by the acceleration in new technology adoption. I think it has a lot to do with the speed and the number of new capabilities in which new software can be delivered to the marketplace in this open source software model. And that's what makes open source software so popular. I don't have any specific facts on that, so I'm hoping I'm correct in this. But the perception is that the number of releases and the number of capabilities that become available in the open source software is significantly higher than your traditional, a software company doing their own development. I mean, even if we just do the math, the number of, what I'll call the smart kids, writing the code to come up with the new capabilities, it's much higher than any company could potentially provide. And I also think there is a cost factor. As IT shops try to control costs, the capabilities that can be delivered at a lower cost or no cost at all becomes very attractive, especially if they can provide the same capabilities as a commercial software.
And I was going to say it's interesting that you bring that up, because that's really sort of something I'm curious about on your side of the house. I know that you have open source software in your own IT environment, but you've chosen to pay for the commercial version in some cases, and I'm wondering, is that indicative of the desire to try and get the best of both worlds, right? Those open source economics that we've talked about, and sort of that flexibility, but also with the enterprise-ready support and services that come along with actually going for a paid version of it.
Right. So there's definitely a ease of mind knowing that there is a support contract there, that there is a relationship that is built. I think one of the challenges I think with your purely open source software is that when you run into an issue, you're relying on the community to help you out, right? Versus being able to have your IT organization pick up the phone and call a number and go through the support process of the first tier support, second tier support, escalation, et cetera, et cetera. If it was a purely development model, I can see how relying on the community would be good enough. But in an organized IT organization where you have your first tier, second tier support, it's harder to expect our first tier, second tier support team to go reach out to the community versus picking up the phone and call a established vendor to get support for a particular piece of software that we might be having an issue with. So there's definitely that peace of mind. And in addition to that, yes, absolutely, the stability and the added value of a company thoroughly testing out the release before it's actually released to the customer is definitely valuable, especially for our critical environment. So if we were to use an OpenStack, say from a particular distro from say Red Hat, for example, we're expecting that Red Hat has gone through, has run the software through the gauntlet and is releasing a supportable version as far as they're concerned, into our environment. So those values are definitely something that is needed as far as getting a commercially available open source piece of software.
Okay. Well, great. That literally is all of the questions that I have for this Zcast, but I certainly want to say thanks again, Ed, for taking the time to share your insights with us. Hopefully we get an opportunity to do several more of these, and again, I'm excited for the opportunity to hopefully meet you here at Galaxy in a couple of weeks.
Yep, absolutely. And thank you for your time.